The hum of the airport was steady, rolling suitcases, coffee orders, and muffled announcements echoing through the terminal. Among the crowd walked a tall man in black, long ponytail, dark shades, calm stride. To most, he looked like a quiet traveler blending in with everyone else. But that man was Steven Seagal, martial arts master, Hollywood legend, and unbeknownst to almost everyone there, a covert government operative returning from an off-grid mission in Eastern Europe. He walked with deliberate stillness, a presence that drew subtle glances. But not all of them were friendly. At the security checkpoint, Officer Blake, a middle-aged officer with a reputation for arrogance, noticed Steven from across the line. To him, the dark glasses and foreign passport looked suspicious. "Hey, you," Blake barked, waving him over. Steven stopped, politely removing his sunglasses. "Yes, officer." Blake eyed him up and down, sneering. "Where are you coming from?" "Ukraine," Steven replied calmly. Blake's tone sharpened. "What's the purpose of your visit here?" "Home," Steven said simply. "I live here." The officer frowned. "You live here? You don't look like you belong." A few passengers turned their heads, sensing the hostility. Steven's posture didn't change. Shoulders square, hands relaxed. "I've traveled a long way," he said quietly. "I'd appreciate a little respect." Blake scoffed. "Respect? Then show me your ID and open that bag right now." The surrounding line fell silent. Steven handed over his documents without protest. Blake inspected them suspiciously, muttering, "Seagal, huh? You think you're some kind of celebrity or something?" Steven didn't answer. His patience was deep, but so was the weight behind his silence. He'd dealt with worse, corrupt men, hostile borders, and tense negotiations. But there was something about this officer's tone that tested his discipline. Then, Blake tossed his passport onto the table and stepped closer. "I don't care who you are. Around here, I'm the authority." For a moment, their eyes locked. Steven's calm gaze met Blake's arrogance, an immovable wall meeting reckless force. The tension was so thick you could feel it. But when the officer put his hands on Steven, what happened next left the entire airport silent. The security checkpoint was growing quieter by the second. People stopped talking, phones paused mid-scroll. The air felt charged, like a storm was about to hit. Officer Blake's voice cut through the hum. "Take off the glasses. The jacket too. Empty your pockets." Steven obeyed without a word, moving slow and deliberate like someone who had learned long ago that calm was more dangerous than anger. "Where were you again?" Blake repeated. "Ukraine," Steven said evenly. "Doing what?" "Training local law enforcement," Blake smirked. "Yeah, right. What are you, some kind of soldier?" Steven's tone didn't change. "Something like that." The officer gave a mocking laugh. "Sure, and I'm the president." He turned to the crowd, chuckling loudly as if to humiliate Steven further. "You hear that, folks? This guy thinks he's a secret agent or something." No one laughed. The people in line shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the two men. A woman whispered to her husband, "Isn't that Steven Seagal? The movie guy?" Her husband squinted. "Looks like him, but maybe not." Blake slammed his hand on the inspection table. "Bag, open it." Steven unzipped his small leather carry-on, revealing only a few clothes, a book, and a folded document case. Blake rummaged through it carelessly. "What's this?" "Diplomatic clearance papers," Steven replied quietly. "Diplomatic?" Blake scoffed. "You really are full of stories, huh?" Steven's patience held, but his stillness made the officer angrier. There was no fear in his eyes, no guilt, no flinch, just complete composure. That unshakable calm made Blake feel challenged, and his ego couldn't stand it. "Look at me when I talk to you," Blake barked. Steven turned his gaze slowly, locking eyes with the officer. "I am." For a heartbeat, the entire room froze. The intensity in Seagal's eyes was unnerving. Even without a word, it felt like a warning, gentle but absolute. But Blake pushed forward, his pride overruling his sense. "I've seen your type before," he said bitterly. "Think you're above the law?" "Not on my watch." A murmur rippled through the travelers. Phones started recording. The blue light of cameras flickered everywhere. Blake noticed and puffed his chest out even more, as if performing for an audience. Steven raised one hand slightly. "Officer, you're overreacting." "I've done nothing wrong." "Don't tell me how to do my job," Blake snapped. "If you don't comply, I'll detain you right here, right now." At that, a mother holding her child whispered nervously, He's being too aggressive. Another man muttered, "Why's he treating him like that? The guy's not even resisting." Stephen exhaled deeply, a hint of fatigue crossing his face. He looked around, the nervous passengers, the flashing cameras, the anxious staff, and then back to Blake. "You should calm down," he said softly. "Before you make a mistake you'll regret." That line, simple, controlled, only poured gasoline on Blake's temper. "Is that a threat?" he shouted. "It's advice," Stephen replied. Blake's jaw tightened. He stepped forward until their faces were inches apart. "You don't tell me what to do. You're just another foreigner who thinks he can talk big." That word, foreigner, hung heavy in the air. A few people gasped. One woman near the line whispered, "Did he just say that?" Stephen's face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker, brief but powerful, like a dormant storm waking up. "Sir," he said slowly, "this is not how you treat people." Blake sneered. "I'll treat you however I damn well please." He reached out suddenly, shoving Stephen's shoulder. "Now back off before I bump before you what?" Stephen interrupted, his tone still measured but now colder. "You've already crossed the line." Blake froze for a second, surprised at the confidence in Stephen's voice. But his ego wouldn't let him stop. "You think you're tough? You think those sunglasses make you special?" Stephen tilted his head slightly. "No, discipline does." And with that, silence fell again. Even the nearby guards hesitated. There was something about Seagal's presence that shifted the air. He wasn't angry, but in control. Completely in control. Blake, realizing people were filming, doubled down. "Put your hands behind your back," he ordered. Stephen didn't move. "On what charge?" "Obstruction." "Obstruction of what? Your pride?" The officer's face turned red. He stepped closer again, veins pulsing in his neck. A voice from the back called out, "Leave the man alone." Another said, "He hasn't done anything." Blake turned to the crowd and barked, "Everyone stay out of this." He pointed to the cameras. "Turn those off or I'll confiscate your phones." Nobody listened. Stephen, still calm, looked around the crowd and then back at the officer. His voice lowered, but every syllable cut through the tension. "Respect goes both ways, officer. Don't forget that." The officer's hands twitched at his belt. The atmosphere was electric. One wrong move and it would explode. Have you ever seen someone get humiliated by authority for no reason? What would you have done if you were there watching this? Also, tell us below. Which country and city are you watching this story from? I love seeing where my audience is tuning in from. The air inside the terminal had grown thick with unease. Travelers whispered nervously, camera phones now fully recording. Everyone could sense that something was about to snap. Officer Blake's face was red with rage. His voice cracked like a whip. "Last warning. Put your hands behind your back or I'll use force." Stephen stood motionless, feet rooted, his tone calm but firm. "Officer, there's no need for violence. I've cooperated with every order." "You're resisting," Blake shouted, grabbing at his radio. "Security backup at Gate C, possible threat." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone gasped, "Threat? He's just standing there." Stephen took a slow breath. He had dealt with armed cartels and political warlords. But what stood before him now was something different. The raw ugliness of unchecked power. "Listen," he said softly. "I don't want trouble." "You're overstepping." But Blake didn't want to listen. He wanted control. "I said back off," he roared, and in a sudden outburst he lunged forward and shoved Stephen hard by the chest. The crowd gasped. Bags dropped. A woman screamed. Stephen stumbled half a step back, steadying himself instantly. His eyes, calm moments ago, hardened. Still, he didn't raise his voice. "You just made a serious mistake," he said quietly. Blake sneered. "Oh yeah, what are you gonna do, tough guy?" And then, in an act that froze the entire terminal, Blake grabbed Stephen by the throat. His hand clamped down, shoving Stephen against the inspection table. The metallic crash echoed across the hall. Gasps turned to shouts. Someone yelled, "He's choking him." Another voice, "Call security." Stephen didn't fight back, not yet. His training kicked in, awareness first, response second. His gaze was steady, scanning the officer's stance, grip, balance. His hand stayed down, relaxed, as if even gravity obeyed him. "Let go," Stephen said softly. His voice was low, the kind of calm that scared you more than shouting ever could. Blake only pressed harder. "You think you can talk down to me? You think you're better than me?" The veins in his neck bulged. The camera flashes intensified. Dozens of passengers were filming from every angle now. Stephen's hand slowly lifted, deliberate, precise. In one smooth motion, he gripped the officer's wrist, turned it slightly, and applied controlled pressure. The sound was subtle, a twist, a shift, and suddenly Blake's body stiffened in pain. Stephen released his throat with the movement, spun Blake's arm behind his back, and pinned him against the table, all in less than 2 seconds. No punch. No aggression. Just control. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others screamed. The cameras caught every angle. Blake grunted in shock, unable to move. Stephen leaned close to his ear. "If I were you," he said in a quiet, even tone, "I'd start respecting the badge you wear." Blake's voice cracked. You attacked an officer." Stephen stepped back, hands raised slightly, palms open. "No officer. I defended myself from assault." A few travelers clapped, breaking the silence. The tension broke, replaced by murmurs of disbelief. One man near the gate said aloud, "He could have crushed him if he wanted. He's holding back." Security staff began rushing toward the scene. 2 guards, unsure what had happened, tried to assess the situation. One of them asked, "What's going on here?" Blake, still red-faced, tried to speak but stumbled over his words. He attacked me." "Arrest him," a woman shouted from behind the rope line. "No! We saw everything. You grabbed him." Another man held up his phone, recording. "I got the whole thing on video." He was calm the entire time. Stephen didn't speak. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his sleeves, and took a slow step back from the chaos. Blake lunged again, pointing a finger. "You're under arrest." "Enough," Stephen said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You're out of control." And for a moment, everyone stopped moving. His tone wasn't loud, but it had authority. Not the authority of a movie star, but of someone who had spent years leading men in real operations where one wrong move meant lives lost. Blake hesitated. Something in Stephen's eyes told him he was no ordinary man. Stephen's expression softened slightly as he looked around the stunned travelers. "This is not how justice works," he said. "This is how respect dies." The guards exchanged glances. One whispered, "Wait. He does look familiar. Isn't that—" Before he could finish, Blake shouted again, trying to regain dominance. Everyone stepped back. "I said back off." But now no one was listening. The tide had turned. Even the crowd began to push back verbally. "Let him go. He didn't do anything wrong. Someone call the supervisor." Blake turned in circles, surrounded by judgment, by cameras, by truth, and by the man who stood still as a mountain before him. Stephen exhaled slowly. "I warned you, officer. You chose force." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the children watching from their parents' arms knew something powerful had just happened. Not a fight, but a message. If you saw this happening in real life, an innocent person being attacked by someone in authority, would you step in, record it, or stay quiet? Tell me below what you would have done. The terminal was chaos. Voices overlapped, phones were raised high, and tension clung to the air like static. Officer Blake stood frozen, his arm still aching from the grip that had effortlessly neutralized him seconds ago. He couldn't process it. The man he just tried to choke hadn't fought back. He'd simply moved, and somehow Blake had lost all control. The security team hesitated, unsure of whom to believe. The sight before them was confusing. A furious officer and a calm, unshaken traveler standing over him like nothing had happened. A young guard whispered, "What just happened?" Another guard replied quietly, He flipped Blake like he was a kid." But Steven Seagal didn't move toward them. He stood still, breathing slowly, his posture steady, eyes focused, shoulders loose, hands visible. He wasn't angry. He was centered. To those who understood discipline, it was the posture of a man who had been through far worse and had nothing to prove. The crowd murmured louder now. Someone near the back gasped, "Wait, that's not just anyone. That's Steven Seagal." A teenage boy holding his phone whispered to his friend, "Dude, you're kidding. The Steven Seagal? The movie guy?" The friend squinted through the phone camera. "It is, bro, that's the guy from Under Siege." Word spread fast, faster than the security team could control. "That's Steven Seagal. Is he really an agent or something?" "No way, why would he be traveling alone?" Officer Blake blinked, stunned by the murmurs. "Steven, who?" The guard nearest him hesitated. "Sir, I think you just assaulted a federal agent." Blake turned on him angrily. What? That's ridiculous. He's some washed-up actor. But then, the young guard pointed to the laminated folder Blake had thrown aside earlier. The one Stephen had mentioned was diplomatic clearance papers. One of the senior officers picked it up and flipped it open. His expression changed instantly. "Oh my God," he muttered under his breath. "It's legit. Homeland credentials." The color drained from Blake's face. "You've got to be kidding me." Stephen finally spoke, his tone even but cold. "I warned you not to make this mistake." Blake swallowed hard. You set me up?" "No," Stephen said simply. "You set yourself up." The senior officer hurried forward, motioning to the other guards. "Step back, everyone. Now." They formed a loose circle, not around Stephen, but around Blake. The officer held out Stephen's documents respectfully. "Sir, we are deeply sorry for this misunderstanding." Stephen nodded slightly. "Apology accepted. But make sure he understands why it's a problem," Blake stammered. This isn't what it looks like." Stephen turned toward the crowd, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is exactly what it looks like. Power abused, respect forgotten." The murmurs in the crowd grew stronger. People began talking among themselves, some angry, some amazed. Phones kept recording, hundreds of eyes capturing every moment. A woman near the front said, "He stayed so calm even when that guy grabbed him by the throat." A man added, "That's discipline. That's what real strength looks like." Blake pointed a shaking finger. "You're not above the law." Stephen's response came low, controlled, and razor-sharp. "I am the law, when the law forgets itself." The words hit like a thunderclap. The security team froze, uncertain if they'd just heard a confession or a warning. But the authority in his tone left no doubt. This wasn't an actor playing tough. This was a man who had walked the line between duty and danger for decades. For the first time, Blake saw something behind those calm eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, but something heavier. Experience, authority, power without ego. Stephen stepped forward just enough to make Blake flinch. "The badge on your chest," he said, "means you serve people, not intimidate them." "You forgot that the moment you raised your hand." The onlookers nodded. A ripple of applause spread quietly through the crowd. Blake's voice broke. You're making me look bad in front of everyone." Stephen replied softly, "No, officer. You did that yourself." At that, the senior officer stepped in. "That's enough. Officer Blake, you're relieved of duty until further notice." Blake's eyes widened. "You can't do that." "I just did," the senior officer said sternly. "And for the record, this entire incident is being recorded by half the airport." Stephen finally looked away, exhaling slowly, as if letting go of the weight of the moment. He put his sunglasses back on, his expression unreadable. "I didn't want this to turn ugly," he said. "But sometimes truth has to be seen to be believed." He turned to the crowd and gave a small nod, not a performer's gesture, but one of quiet gratitude. The people clapped, some cheering softly, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief. For the first time in years, an airport full of strangers had just witnessed a lesson in humility, live, unedited, and unforgettable. Have you ever seen someone stand up calmly to injustice like this? Would you have recognized Steven Seagal in that moment, or thought he was just another traveler? Tell us below where you're watching this from, your country and city. The terminal had gone completely silent. The crowd, the guards, even the whir of luggage belts, everything seemed to pause in the gravity of what had just unfolded. The once aggressive officer now stood pale and trembling, facing a man who radiated calm authority. Steven Seagal adjusted his jacket and stepped forward, his boots echoing softly on the tiled floor. "You see," he said, voice deep and even, "this is what happens when people forget that power isn't a weapon. It's a responsibility." The senior officer bowed his head slightly. "Sir, we'll handle this. I promise there will be consequences." But Stephen raised a hand. "No. Let this be handled the right way, in front of everyone." He turned to the crowd. Hundreds now, phones still recording, eyes locked on him. His presence filled the space effortlessly. Every day someone somewhere is harassed because of how they look, how they speak, or where they come from, he said. They're humiliated, intimidated, treated like they don't belong. He paused, scanning the faces. But here's the truth. No one has the right to judge another human being by appearance. Not even the ones in uniform. The crowd nodded, murmuring in agreement. A man near the back called out, "That's right." Stephen's eyes returned to Officer Blake, who stood stiffly, his pride collapsing under the weight of public shame. "You looked at me and saw a threat," Stephen said quietly. "But you never asked who I was or why I was here. You just assumed." Blake swallowed hard. His voice cracked. I was doing my job." Stephen tilted his head slightly. "Your job is to protect, not to provoke." For a moment, the two men stood face to face, the aggressor and the man who refused to be broken. The crowd could feel it. The energy had shifted entirely. Stephen was no longer defending himself. He was teaching everyone in that terminal something larger than the scene itself. Then, slowly, Stephen reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black leather case. He opened it and held it up for everyone to see. Inside, a silver badge gleamed beside a federal identification card. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the guards leaned closer. The seal read, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Special Operations Liaison. Blake blinked. "You're a federal agent?" Stephen's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Among other things," murmurs filled the air. "No way. He's a real agent? Wait, I thought he was just an actor." Stephen nodded once. "I've spent decades working alongside international agencies, training law enforcement, assisting on counterterrorism operations. You thought you were intimidating a celebrity. You were actually choking a man who trains the very people you claim to represent." Blake's face turned ghost white. His hands trembled as he tried to find words, but there were none left to defend him. The senior officer stepped forward. "Sir, on behalf of the department, I sincerely apologize." Stephen stopped him gently. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to every innocent person who's ever been treated like this." He turned once more to the crowd. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen real injustice. Not from a movie set, but from life itself. Respect is not something you demand. It's something you earn, through how you treat others. Remember that, not just in this airport, but everywhere you go. Applause broke out. Hesitant at first, then louder, stronger, until the entire terminal was clapping. Some even cheered. A woman wiping tears from her eyes whispered to her son, "That's what a real man looks like." Stephen gave a small bow of acknowledgement, but didn't smile. This wasn't triumph, it was a reminder. He walked toward Blake and looked him straight in the eye. "I don't hate you," he said, "but I hope this moment changes you. Because next time, it might not be someone who can defend themselves." Blake's voice was almost a whisper. You're right." Stephen extended a hand, not to shake, but to release the tension. "Then do better. That's all anyone can ask." For a second, no one moved. Then Blake, humiliated yet deeply moved, nodded. "Yes, sir." Stephen turned back to the senior officer. "Take care of him. Train him right. Teach him what it means to serve." "Yes, sir?" the senior officer said immediately, motioning to his team. Stephen glanced one last time at the crowd, most of whom were now lowering their phones, realizing they had just witnessed something far bigger than a viral clip. They had seen humility meet strength, and arrogance crumble before honor. He picked up his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and began walking toward the boarding gate. The crowd instinctively parted for him, silent and respectful. As he passed, people murmured softly, "He didn't even lose his temper. That's real discipline." Legend. Just before he disappeared down the hallway, Stephen looked over his shoulder and said quietly, almost to himself, "Justice isn't loud. It's calm, clear, and unshakable." And with that, he was gone. Have you ever seen someone stay calm under extreme pressure like Stephen did? Would you have lost your temper, or handled it with quiet strength? Tell us in the comments where you're watching this from, your city and country. By the time Steven Seagal disappeared down the terminal, the world had already started watching. Within minutes, videos of the incident hit social media, shaky, grainy clips capturing the exact moment the officer grabbed Steven's throat, followed by the effortless reversal that left the entire airport in shock. Steven Seagal Airport incident began trending globally within an hour. News outlets scrambled to verify the footage. The captions ranged from "racist cop harasses wrong guy" to "Steven Seagal shows ultimate discipline under pressure." At the airport, chaos still buzzed. Reporters started arriving. Cameras flashed. Officer Blake sat on a bench near the security office, his face pale and hollow. He wasn't in cuffs, not yet, but his badge and gun had been taken. A senior official from airport administration approached, holding a phone. "It's everywhere," he said grimly. "CNN, BBC, even local news in Manila and Tokyo are covering it." Blake groaned, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't know who he was." The official replied coldly, "That's the problem. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." A hush fell over the room. Outside, travelers were still talking, replaying clips and exchanging reactions. A woman told a nearby journalist. He was calm the entire time. Never yelled, never fought back. "That's real power." Another man added. The officer kept pushing him like he was trying to prove something, but Seagal just stood there, like he knew exactly how it would end. Meanwhile, in a nearby lounge, 2 airport employees scrolled through their phones. "Look at the views," one said. "It's already at 10 million. 10 million? Yeah, and climbing fast." He didn't even have to speak much. People are calling it the silent lesson. Back in the security office, Blake's supervisor entered holding a printed report. "You've been suspended, effective immediately." Internal Affairs wants a full statement. Blake's head shot up. "Suspended? For what? For assault, misuse of authority, racial profiling, and bringing international embarrassment to the department," the supervisor said flatly. Blake's eyes filled with regret. "I just thought he was being difficult." He wouldn't answer straight. The supervisor cut him off. "You didn't listen. You judged him, and now the whole world knows." Blake slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the floor. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Not because he lost control, but because he realized what he had done to another man's dignity. Across the city, news anchors discussed the event. "Viewers, what you're watching now is Steven Seagal." Yes, the actor. "Showing incredible restraint when a U.S. officer physically attacked him at an airport," one said. Another anchor added, "What's remarkable isn't that Seagal defended himself, but how he did it, calmly, professionally. With discipline most of us wouldn't manage in that situation." Clips from different angles flooded YouTube. Reaction channels dissected every move. Psychologists were interviewed on live TV. "His composure was absolute," one expert explained. "He showed control without aggression. That's mastery, emotional and physical." Even other law enforcement officers began commenting online. One tweet read, "That officer just got schooled by the calmest man alive. Respect to Seagal. That's how you handle chaos." The story wasn't just about fame anymore. It had turned into a discussion about respect, bias, and professionalism. Meanwhile, at a quiet gate lounge far from the chaos, Steven sat alone by a window, sipping green tea. He had no phone in hand, no expression of triumph. Just silence. A young janitor passing by recognized him and hesitated. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you," he said shyly. Steven turned and gave a small nod. "For what?" "For staying calm," the boy said. "Most people would have fought. You showed what control really looks like." Steven smiled faintly. "It's not about control," he said softly. "It's about understanding when force serves justice, and when silence teaches it." The boy nodded respectfully and left. Moments later, Steven's phone finally buzzed. It was an encrypted message from a government contact. "Saw the footage. You handled it perfectly. Washington's impressed. But stay low for a while." Steven typed back, "Just did what was right." He looked out the window at the runway, the sunset painting the sky gold. "Maybe," he murmured. "The world still needs reminders." Back at the airport's press conference later that evening, the department's spokesperson addressed the media. "Officer Blake has been placed under investigation pending further review. We are grateful no one was seriously hurt, and we commend Mr. Seagal for his remarkable professionalism." Reporters bombarded with questions. Was the officer racist? Will there be charges? Did Seagal's federal status play a role in the outcome? The spokesperson avoided direct answers, but the tone was clear. The department was in damage control. Blake, meanwhile, sat at home watching the footage for the 100th time. He saw himself yelling, grabbing, losing control. Then he saw Steven, standing calm, breathing steady, eyes sharp yet compassionate. Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time, he realized he hadn't been fighting a man. He'd been fighting his own prejudice. He whispered to himself, I'll be better. I have to be better. Across the internet, comments flooded in by the millions. He handled that like a monk with a black belt. Power without humility is dangerous. Seagal just showed both. That officer learned a lesson he'll never forget. And among all the trending hashtags, one stood out the most: simple, powerful, and universal. Respect before authority. What did you feel watching this part of the story? Anger, respect, pride. Do you think Stephen did the right thing by staying calm? Comment respect if you believe no one should be judged by appearance. And tell us where you're watching from. The next morning, the entire world was talking about one thing: Steven Seagal's calm confrontation with a racist officer. Clips of the airport incident had now surpassed 100 million views across platforms. Headlines screamed from every corner of the internet. Steven Seagal schools racist cop with silence. Power meets patience. Seagal's real-life lesson in respect. Secret agent Steven Seagal? Airport altercation reveals hidden truth. For once, the internet agreed on something. Across continents and languages, one message echoed: respect is stronger than rage. On talk shows, hosts debated how an encounter that could have turned violent became a viral example of discipline and integrity. A well-known civil rights lawyer said on live TV, Steven Seagal didn't just defend himself. He defended every person who's ever been unfairly profiled. Clips of the incident played alongside Steven's old movie scenes, but fans pointed out how different this was. This wasn't a movie, one tweet read. This was real, and he handled it like a master. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, where Steven had spent years doing humanitarian work, news anchors praised his composure. He showed the world that true warriors don't need to shout, one commentator said. They speak through action. At the U.S. Department of Homeland Security headquarters, a quiet meeting was held behind closed doors. An official placed a tablet on the table showing the viral video. It's everywhere, she said. Public opinion is overwhelmingly in his favor. The director leaned back, nodding. He just reminded the whole country what discipline under pressure looks like. Maybe we should be teaching that in training. Another official added, people trust him more now than they trust half the politicians on TV. The director smiled faintly, because he didn't perform. He acted like a man with principles. Elsewhere, Officer Blake sat alone in his small apartment, the blinds drawn. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Journalists, reporters, online trolls. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he opened a blank notepad and started writing a letter. To the man I disrespected, he wrote, "You didn't just teach me a lesson, you saved me from becoming someone I never wanted to be." He paused, sighing deeply. "I let anger and pride guide me. You showed me strength without hate. I'll spend the rest of my career trying to live up to that." He folded the note and addressed it simply, to Steven Seagal, the man who stayed calm. That same day, Steven was back in Los Angeles training at a private dojo. The walls were lined with calligraphy that read, "True power needs no display." A student approached timidly. "Sensei, the world's talking about you." Steven smiled slightly. "Let them talk. What matters is that they think." He stepped onto the mat, demonstrating a simple wrist lock, the same move he'd used at the airport. "This," he said, "isn't about hurting. It's about controlling. The strongest person is the one who controls himself first." The students nodded, absorbing every word. A reporter, waiting outside the dojo gates, tried to ask questions when Steven finished his session. "Mr. Seagal, millions are calling you a hero. How do you feel about that?" Steven paused, adjusting his black belt. "I'm no hero," he said quietly. "A hero is someone who faces injustice every day without cameras watching. I just happened to be filmed." Then, with his usual calm, he walked away. By evening, the world had already transformed his calm response into a movement. Hashtags like "respect before authority," "stay calm, stand tall," and "Shocker Seagal mindset" trended for days. People shared their own stories. Moments when they had been judged unfairly but chose to respond with dignity instead of anger. In classrooms, teachers used the video as a discussion piece on restraint and respect. In police academies, instructors replayed it during ethics training. And in airports across the world, security officers began hearing a new phrase from travelers who smiled and said, "Remember the Seagal rule. Stay calm." That night, Steven sat in his garden sipping tea under the glow of lanterns. The sound of crickets filled the air. His assistant approached with a tablet showing the global reactions. "Sir, your message reached over 200 million people," she said softly. "Everyone's calling it the moment that restored their faith in humanity." Stephen looked up at the stars and replied simply, "I didn't plan to go viral. I just refused to lose myself." He set the cup down gently. In a world full of noise, sometimes silence speaks loudest. The screen faded to black. If you believe no one should ever be judged by their appearance, type respect in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, your city and country, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true life stories that prove integrity still matters.